full socialism, but we'll get to a whisker of it, and he'll do all of that, our Messiah Corbyn. And it's true, in 2017, as we all know now, under Corbyn, the Labour Party had more votes, more people voted for Labour under Corbyn than they did under Starmer on July the 4th. That is true, and even in 2019, he had a rather good result, actually, but followed the establishment rule, the unwritten rule, and resigned his leadership role. I think this was the last of many mistakes he made. One of the less serious ones, but I have seen quite a few mistakes as former chair of Labour against the witch hunt. I don't want to, I don't think I want to have a Corbyn bash fest. There's not much point in that. But I think the point of going over these things again is we were very close to something or other, and we have to learn from mistakes that were made. Otherwise, we'll keep making them. And if we ever get into a similar situation, we have to be better prepared, and we have to do things differently. So I want to look at a few things, including why was he defeated? What could he and the Labour left have done differently, even under today's circumstances of capitalism in decline? And what is the role of communists and Marxists in the Labour Party, and what is the possible future that we're now facing? So, I mean, you all know most of these things that I'm going to talk about now, but I think there's some questions at the end that we could probably discuss. So why couldn't he come to office? And I'm going to say office rather than power. Why was Corbyn defeated? And yes, there were very strong external reasons by the right inside and outside the party. You remember the general called for a mutiny, threatening mutiny against the Corbyn government, the media, the ruling class, the entire establishment, which, as Moshe Machaber called it, happily coincided with the campaign by the pro-Israeli lobby to redefine what anti-Semitism is in order to oppose the stronger and stronger BDS movement, the boycott, the disinvestment and sanctions movement. So there was a happy coincidence. They joined forces, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, to get Corbyn, an anti-imperialist, a pro-Palestine campaigner. But there were also a lot of internal reasons. And I think Brexit is a reason that has played a role in Corbyn's defeat in 2019. Corbyn is a classic and lifelong Lexiteer, if you want to call him that. He's in favor of choosing smaller capitalism over bigger capitalism. But he was made to argue for EU membership, continued EU membership, and he didn't do it very convincingly, it has to be said. He didn't convince anybody that either he believes in it or that there is anything positive to be gained from staying within the European Union. There's been no attempt being made to have a positive vision of any kind of a workers' Europe or United States of Europe, as Trotsky and Lenin outlined it. So there was none of that. And, the Labour Party looked extremely weak over Brexit and was punished in 2019. The key problem, I think, though, was that it was a pure accident that Corbyn became leader, not the reflection of a mass socialist sentiment in the Labour Party or in wider society, quite the opposite. The bureaucracy in the Labour Party, the Parliamentary Labour Party, were dominated by the right. Clearly, even if Corbyn had come in and could have become PM, he would not have gotten anything through Parliament. And so while Corbyn is, of course, a peacenik and a hippie, and we can criticize him for not being tough enough, it's very, very doubtful, I think, that anybody tougher from the Labour left would have made a real difference. I mean, until 2016, I thought John McDonnell would have been a bit tougher. As it turns out, he's not just not tougher, he was a total pushover and a total disappointment. So I think once Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party, they were entirely at a loss what to do, the Labour left. He employed advisors that he hoped would help him along, Seamus Milne, Andrew Murray, John McDonnell, as I said. But as we know now from reports of people who were quite close, they had no clue what to do. They did not know what to do with the situation there, where you have the right dominates everything in the party, and now it has a left leadership. How do you solve that problem? They didn't know how to solve any of these issues, so they continued with the old Labour left idea that you have to follow the same strategy that the right has. We have to aim for government. That's it. We must. I'm the Labour leader now. My aim is government. That is the inbuilt limitation of the Labour. Of Labour, the whole reason of its existence, and the Labour left. So it clings to, and we've had this earlier in the week with Lawrence Parker looking at the British road to socialism, and Corbyn, the whole Labour left does follow unconsciously or consciously that program or a similar program. You can legislate for socialism by an ever more left-wing Labour government, and it's going to be, national, yes, so we have to nationalize things, etc. So that's their strategy. And in order to get to that point, to get to power to government, you have to, of course, have unity with the right, because the right is so powerful, etc. So I do remember, right from even when there hadn't been a witch hunt yet, arguing with people in Momentum, socialist action types, people who've been around forever, the Labour left, we have to support all Labour candidates. It doesn't matter if they're on the right, if they're on the left, this is our task. We must support Labour. We have to have unity, statement after statement from the campaign for Labour Party democracy, etc. It was all about unity with the right. And of course, as we know, they were bending over backwards to the right, the Labour, Corbyn leadership. So the witch hunt against the left, and I don't tell you anything new here, was started under Corbyn and with the support of his General Secretary, Jenny Formby, in a futile attempt to appease the right and get them to just shut up eventually. So you had fast-track expulsions were introduced under Corbyn. You had, obviously, the leaked report is still a really worthwhile study, and we should remember and remind people of that. If you read the leaked report, yes, it shows there was a civil war going on with the right, but crucially, it shows that Jenny Formby and Jeremy Corbyn were sacrificing were sacrificing their supporters, were sacrificing Tony Greenstein, Jackie Walker, and especially Chris Williamson. He was the lamb to the slaughter. Look how we tried to get rid of him, and this is all we did, and he was terrible, and look how we got him out. As one of his last acts as in the leadership role, Jeremy Corbyn proposed Tom Watson should go to the House of Lords, which was, if you need any more, symbolic sign of the idiocy of trying to appease the right. This was the man who led and helped to organize the various coup attempts against Corbyn. He said so openly, went to the media and stabbed him in the back, the front, the top, the bottom, stabbed him everywhere. The obvious irony of this self-defeating strategy, Corbyn got to taste it himself. It didn't take him a genius to work that out. He himself was suspended for anti-Semitism, of course, because he didn't stand up to it. And we also have to have Starmer now, because it's quite difficult, actually, once you have a witch hunt going, it's quite difficult to stop it. Starmer is now being accused of being an anti-Semite in some circles because he's toying with the idea of not selling arms to Israel anymore. And that is anti-Semitic, don't you know it, if you criticize Israel. So the whole left, of course, and beyond, is suffering from the consequences from this question of, free speech, what is anti-Semitism, what is anti-Zionism, the whole solidarity movement, the Palestinians, etc. Just seen it today in the papers, anti-Semitism cases on a record high. Every paper's got it. Who says it? The Community Security Trust. Nobody, no newspaper is trying to explain what the Community Security Trust is. We know it's run by right-wingers with a political agenda who actually, have helped Israel to redefine what anti-Semitism and Zionism is. Today, I've read in the Daily Mail, I must admit, that Zionism is the right of Jews to live in Israel. That's what Zionism is. So if you're an anti-Zionist, that means you don't allow, you think Jews can't live in Israel. That's what a Zionist is. We've all seen the redefinition of anti-Semitism from, criticism of Jews as Jews or discrimination of Jews to criticism of Israel. And that's been extremely, extremely successful. And that's probably the worst things about the whole campaign against Corbyn. It's also interesting, that's also been in the newspapers the last few days, that Starmer's government has shelved the free speech legislation that was supposed to go through, the Tory free speech legislation that was supposed to go through universities. I think he's been quite aware that that also means, if you do it properly, you'd have to have anti-Semites speak. You have to let people speak who are critical of Israel. That was not on the agenda, of course. They didn't want that. I think that's part of the reason why they've shelved this legislation. It would have been quite difficult to stop some people with uncomfortable views. The right, of course, through all this period and before, clearly has no interest in unity with the left, as we can see by Starmer's action. And if only Corbyn had been half as tough on the right as Starmer had been on the left, we might be in a slightly, not a qualitatively different situation, but quite slightly different situation. We've seen 7 MPs had the whip withdrawn for opposing the 2-child benefit cap, which was designed to shut up the rest of the so-called socialist campaign group of Labour MPs if they were I'm not sure if they were ever going to say anything in any case, but it certainly worked. They're now very quiet as little mice. And I wouldn't be surprised if actually in a few months Starmer does do away with the 2-child benefit cap. It's very unpopular policy. It's even in bourgeois papers, they're quite against it. So that could have been it's a symbolic it was a symbolic act to suspend these 7. And there's talk they're coming back in 6 months. That's apparently the punishment. You're out for 6 months as a symbol, as a sign, the rest of you shut up. So I think considering all of this, the right so much in charge in the Labour Party and supported by the entire establishment, Corbyn could have never taken power, in the sense of that he would have been able to really change anything in society. He might have taken office for a bit, for a few months perhaps, but something would have happened, some campaign would have been launched and he would have been done away with. If you haven't read A Very British Coup by Chris Mullin, I do suggest comrades do. I mean, it's been written 30, 40 years ago, but it reads like the Corbyn period. And it describes one attempt or one way that they can do away with, with a left-wing leader, not killing him or whatever, but of course a scandal will be enough to get rid of them. And I'd say it's not so much because Corbyn was, all that or had such a radical program, but with his anti-imperialist views and his pro-Palestine views, he was incompatible with what's going on in the world today. The rest of his program is, of course, quite harmless. But even if he had been allowed to take power, and I think that's also worth considering and thinking through, perhaps if there had been a more left-wing PLP, if he hadn't been opposed every step of the way by his own MPs, what would a Corbyn government have been able to achieve in a capitalism in decline? And it doesn't, it's not hard work. You just look across to Germany, to Italy, to Greece. We've had the evidence. The Link, Podemos, Rifondazione Comunista, the Workers' Party of Brazil. What happens when they take power, take office, and they try to change things? And they often do it with the best intentions, and they start up with, wanting to help the workers. But of course, you have to, when you're in government, you have to balance the books. You have to, you have to spend on defense. You have to spend on this. You have to close libraries because, the money is just not there. So you end up attacking the working class, and the working class deserts you. And all of these parties are nowhere, clinging on perhaps, but it shows that it is very difficult to do that without attacking the working class and betraying it. So what could they have done differently, though, the Labour left? And we've, I was a supporter of Labour Party Marxist as well, and just a quick, looking back at it, we did say, Corbyn could have democratized the Labour Party, even under today's circumstances, even under capitalism and in decline, and quite radically from top to bottom, including not be a coward when it comes to the deselection of MPs, which is sort of the minimum that the campaign for Labour Party democracy has been. That was their raison d'etre, that's what they've been fighting for. And when it came to it, they all folded, you know, oh, no, let's not. It became a really popular campaign, but away from the organized Labour left. They didn't dare even calling for that kind of really basic democratic demand. One, you know, even though it was their program. Democratizing the unions, obviously, and the union link. Chuck the right out. Corbyn made no attempt to clear out the structures of the Labour Party. Regional structures, you know, the bureaucracy, hundreds of people working for the Labour Party were selected by the previous General Secretary, and, you know, years ago. And in order to, of course, keep the party for the right and keep it all, but they made no attempt to chuck people out, etc. It took ages before what's his name, McNichol was replaced with Jenny Formby, and we know what she did. And, you know, importantly also is to invite the left to affiliate. I think he could have done that quite easily. He could have invited left groups to affiliate. The CBGB calls that, you know, a united front of a special type, I believe, you know, and it could have worked to bring the left on board. They could have supported him in his fight against the right. But also, I think and that's not something that the Labour left has any history of, is taking seriously the work you can do in opposition. And not just think about, you know, we need to get to government, but also work and build the opposition outside the Labour Party. You know, I'm not necessarily talking about momentum, but momentum could have become something more. I mean, there were hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, up to 100,000 joining momentum. You know, you could have done something serious with that organization. But importantly, is prepare the working class to become the majority, the working class outside the party and inside the party, by educating, organizing, etc., to become a class of and for itself, and a more radical program, of course. We know that Corbyn seems to have had a deal with Tom Watson, you know, the backstabber, not to say anything about Trident, for example. Keep Trident. I keep, you know, ready for nuclear war, even if he became prime minister. Although Corbyn has been fighting against that for all his life. The Labour Party in 1900 thought it could abolish the House of Lords. It had it in its program. Workers' militia, any of these things that like 100 years ago were like normal, you know, they didn't seem particularly radical. But today, oh my God, no, we can't touch any of that. So despite, you know, people saying, oh, For the Many was such a brilliant program, actually read through it and show me the radical bits. It was very, very harmless. You know, even Respect and etc. has a more radical program. So, you know, this is the For the Many, not the Few, or whatever it was called, was loyal to the British Constitution, is I think is how Mike has described it in an article, and quite rightly too. It was never made the attempt to do something different. It never had a view of doing something quite different. And, you know, we do need a party that does something quite different. So, you know, we do need a communist party, a mass communist party that can push along the Labour Party as well. So we do, as communists, as Marxists, we do work in the Labour Party, but we're quite aware that that's not it. We also have to organize outside of it. We engage as communists in order to break the working class from Labourism and support Labour. I think that still remains a key task, like the rope supports the hanged man. We fight on the side of Corbyn and Labour leaders like him against the bourgeoisie and take his side, but we also have to expose their limits. Don't just celebrate him in his limitations. And I think, you know, Labour Party Marxists, despite all its fault, has done a very good job doing that, being critical, but defend him against attacks from the right. So we do, as communists, recognize the Labour Party, as well as the unions and other organizations, as an important arena of the class struggle. But we do understand that by itself, it cannot bring about socialism. And I think that's an issue that not many on the left thought. You know, they thought Corbyn, he'll get in and he'll do it for us. He'll bring socialism, which is a bit daft, but it is a very popular idea out there. So we want to, you know, expand the struggle for democracy, for socialism throughout society, but for that you need a communist party. Now, I found it really interesting. You do bump into Marxists on the Labour left, and Marxists who've been on the Labour left for decades. You know, I'm talking about people like Graham Bash, Chris Knight, etc. And they, you know, we work alongside them on many issues against the witch hunt, etc. And then at some stage, when it becomes clear that Corbyn is failing, etc., and we need to build something out there. Yeah, but you can't build a Marxist party. Marx said so. Don't you know it? I'm like, what? You can't build a communist party. Read the Communist Manifesto, and I'm going to read this out now. Comrades will know this quote, and I've had it thrown at me many times by people on the Marxist Labour left. So this is from the Communist Manifesto, the 1888 translation, sanctioned by Engels, and it says, the communists do not form a separate party opposed to other working class parties. And that means clearly, although it's called the Communist Manifesto, in full, actually, the manifesto of the Communist Party means no. It just means communist. It doesn't mean you build a party. And it is worthwhile looking at why Engels sanctioned this translation. And, you know, Hal Draper has done a really good job on it. It's a really entertaining book. I think it's called The Travels or The Adventures of the Communist Manifesto, where he looks at all these funny translations. And he said Engels did indeed sanction this translation, although it's actually wrong, because he was thinking of parties like the Chartists, who were dead by then, 1888, didn't exist anymore, but had made a real impact before that in the 1840s and 50s, etc. So he wanted to say that Marxists do not form their own little group and leave, you know, these Marxists alone, but, you know, we work together, we organize. He didn't mean the Labour Party, I think, is the key issue. And a much better translation of this, and I think we should emphasize this at every point, really, is instead of saying the communists do not form a separate party opposed to the other working class party, is Hal Draper's translation, the communists are not a special party vis-a-vis the other workers' party. And that is a totally different issue. I mean, it does take dishonesty, I think, to use this mistranslation or this old translation. It takes certain dishonesty to say that this means, considering the whole rest of the Communist Manifesto, that it means you shouldn't build your own communist party. But Hal Draper has been doing this a very good job, as I say, explaining why and what the actual translation into English is. So instead of building what is needed, you know, a Marxist party, Marxists fighting openly for the overthrow of capitalism and, very importantly, map out a way how to get there. Many on the Labour left now either sort of clutch at straws, i.e. anything is better than the Tories and we're just going to have to stick with the Labour Party, you know, things will get better, or they sit and wait and hope for this so-called crisis of expectation. They're not saying it this time around, not like under Blair, you know, they're not calling it a crisis of expectation, but if you read their stuff, it is very similar. There will be, you know, Starmer will disappoint us all so much. It will disappoint the unions. It will disappoint the working class. You'll get the unions breaking from Labour, and they're going to build a different Labour Party Mark II. You know, firstly, I mean, it's very, very dubious if that's going to be any better than the first one. But even while the first one is around, you know, it's very difficult to actually think they would break, especially if Starmer has not promised anything, and he hasn't promised the unions, you know, sweet F all. The little thing that the unions are currently clinging to is sort of doing away with some bits of the anti-trade union laws, which basically, as I understand it, if everything goes through, you'd go back to Blair levels. That's all on the table from Starmer and the Red Queen, which, you know, what's her name? I've forgotten it now. Angela Rayner, yes, the Red Queen. Yeah. She's been, yeah, she's the left now. So, but then you look at, you know, the unions, and they're all very, very quiet, aren't they? Either they're totally supporting the Labour Party, or keeping quite quiet. So even Matt Rack, remember him? Yes, until recently, Labour Representation Committee chair, but he's resigned because the LRC, the Labour Representation Committee, is quite useless. True. But I think he's been very quiet in the Labour Party now, because I think you know, he's been arguing in Durham as well. He's been arguing for patience, and we have to see what happens, etc. So he's not He's not going to break from the Labour Party anytime soon. Neither are Unite or Unison or GMB. Quite the opposite. They are helping Starmer, and they're waiting for crumbs from the table. Kind of can understand it. The disaffiliate. I mean, the left will always call for disaffiliation of the unions from the Labour Party, and you think, and do what? The RMT for a little while affiliated to Tusk. But even that, I mean, Tusk is clearly not an alternative anymore, the trade union and socialist coalition run by the Socialist Party. So they left, can't blame them really. And the election results, unfortunately, we're not sectarian, we wish socialists would get better votes, but they didn't. It is a very difficult time for socialists. So calling for union disaffiliation and then for them to do what exactly? Go into the political wilderness, not do anything political anymore, or what? Who should they support instead politically? Any of these sub-reformist organizations that have sprung up? No, it's not very attractive. Actually, I think there would have been more of a chance of a crisis of expectation under a Prime Minister Corbyn, had he ever become a Prime Minister. And people had such hopes, still have such hopes in the man. He would do something. He would, a socialist-led government. I think I've had Labour lefties, that's what it's going to be. It's not going to be totally socialist, but socialist-led. But he would have clearly failed miserably trying to, from external, but also as internal reasons to make any real change there. So talking of useless organizations and Corbyn, he is still a Labourite. I mean, he's been, he probably still thinks he might get back in like Ken Livingstone. People tell me that he still believes it, if he just behaves nicely and, people still like him and, like Livingstone, he'll come back. I doubt it very much. I think that's really deluded, but who knows? I mean, things always change. The way they are at the moment, I think it's very unlikely. Yes, he's reached out to the 4 independents in Parliament, whose name says it all, independent of, socialism for sure. They're not socialists. They are pro-Palestinians, but are they pro-abortion? Are they pro-women's rights? Are they? We don't know. We'll have to see what happens. I doubt they're going to be reliable allies. He's also reached out to the 7 Labour MPs in Parliament who had the whip withdrawn. But as far as I understand, as far as I know, there hasn't been any, there might be communication behind the scenes, but I think they are looking to get back in as well. As I say, after 6 months is the time scale, as I've heard about the timetable, as I've heard it. So he's pushing local assemblies, which it's different. I mean, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Local assemblies. Who would oppose it? Of course, we are in favor of local democracy. Yes, we want people locally to get together and start discussing what needs to be done and how to change things. Of course, that's not what it is. I mean, we're in favor of Räte in Germany, councils, Soviets in the Soviet in Russia, etc. That was a sort of local democracy. But of course, he wants it instead of building a party, instead of building any kind of coherent alternative that could do anything. And, no doubt, whatever party would come out of it would not be a Marxist or a communist party, but it could give people a pond to swim in. But that's not on the agenda. So there is talk of, oh yeah, once these assemblies are going to be thriving and local, hubs of democracy, that will never happen. But once that happens, then we can build a party. And you can think, so you have the hub here, the network is doing this network is doing that, and then you bring them all together in a party, and they're all doing different things on different programs, but we'll push them all into that one political party, and it's going to be lovely. Because there's going to be 2 or 3 people on top who will decide what the program is and who can join and who can't join if it ever becomes a party. So it's all very ineffective, it's all very undemocratic and not very inspiring. And people, I think, are not very inspired by it. I did join it now. His whatever it's called, I can't. Not that, the other one, Collective, which wants to become a party, and Corbyn is involved in that. And I think when I joined, there were like 120 people had joined. That's apparently the platform he wants to use. And I'm told, there's people like Andrew Murray involved, and they're pushing for him to launch a party of some sort, but he is very reluctant. So even if that becomes a party, or the Peace and Justice, but it is, I think, now collective, it would be very limited, let's put it like that, limited politically, what it fights for, and organizationally, democratically. I doubt they would allow, like even the Linke does in Germany, you're allowed to have a platform, political platform, so Marxists can still get together, even with all the issues that the Linke in Germany has, and organize together, which is, you know, something we Marxists would argue for. So just to finish up on a few questions that perhaps we should discuss, and hopefully we could, you know, hopefully there's a bit of disagreement about it, which makes it more interesting. Could the Labour Party, today's Labour Party under Starmer, could it be turned around again? Could it become again something for the left, or is it now entirely dead? I mean, that's something that's been discussed since the defeat of the Corbyn leadership. And most socialists are now saying it's dead. You know, there's nothing to be saved from it. Any socialist worth the description of socialist has been expelled. True. Starmer has closed down pretty much any avenue for principled political intervention. True. But, and then, you know, you have to look at what is a bourgeois workers' party, as Lenin has talked about it. You know, it's still got, with the affiliation of the union, it's still got a predominantly working class membership, but it acts in the interests of the bourgeoisie. That's still true as well. So sociologically, it is proletarian. Politically, it is capitalist. It's been that for a while, and it still is the same. It's still the case. I think nothing lasts forever. Of course, things change quite dramatically, and this could change as well. But currently, with the unions are still around, etc., and the working class still seeing it as their party, you know, it still is the bourgeois workers' party. Yes, we can't work in it at the moment as Marxists, but again, that could change. We are flexible. Communists are flexible in our approach. So, you know, it doesn't mean we have to follow the Labour Party forever and ever and support it ever and ever and try to get always into it. But for now, if we could, I think we would, you know, because it is an important arena of the class struggle. And you try to influence people. You try to speak to people who view the Labour Party as theirs and who voted for it in their millions. Could a Labour Party, or more precisely, a bourgeois workers' party, ever overthrow capitalism? It's also an interesting question, I think. Could we, you know, might it ever lead to a situation where, along the lines of the British road to socialism, you know, could it ever become like that? Could we ever get to a point? And again, nothing is always the same. If there was a pre-revolutionary situation, if all the organizations, you know, mass organizations on the left, unions are all active, people flocking into them. The socialism has permeated all of society. You know, it's a party of 10 million strong, etc. And the communists are in it organizing. Then perhaps it could become something like that. It all, I think, depends on the class struggle, perhaps. And related. Should socialists, should Labour left in today's capitalism in decline, you know, in a capitalism which needs to balance the books, etc., ever aim for government? Should we consider, you know, that Corbyn might have been right, that, you know, had he been in government, had he been prime minister, he could have done some good things. Very popular view. He could have, even if it's little things, you know, it would have been good. And we should aim for that, because that's how you change things in government. I'd say in today's circumstances, no. As I mentioned earlier, no, the Linke Referendation, it's clear what will happen if you get into a situation like that and you get into government. They either do away with you, or, you know, the struggle or the pressure to balance the books and not to get punished by the International Monetary Fund, etc., are overwhelming, you know, let alone, you know, armies coming, the army or armies from abroad coming to stop what you're trying to do. But again, you know, in a pre-revolutionary situation, things are possibly different. If we're majority, if the working class, the organized working class, and the fight, you know, is agreed that we need socialism, the fight for socialism has permeated all of society, then perhaps we could consider aiming for office and taking power to help the revolutionary process along. You know, if it's the last bit to get us over the line of revolution, if it helps to bring the revolution along, etc., perhaps, you know, but that again would be a totally different situation than we are in now, not as a minority. If you're in a minority, and you know, socialists, communists are in a massive minority at the moment, aiming for government is bound to end in defeat, self-defeat, defeat of the movement. I mean, you could argue, and I think it would be right to argue it, that today the socialist movement has been thrown back massively. We're not even back to 2015 levels before Corbyn. We've been defeated. You know, the right is in the ascendancy, politically, ideologically, etc. That is still going on. We've been thrown back decades. So Corbyn's strategy, I think, and that of the Labour left, was always destined to fail, i.e. aiming for government one way or another. And we have to learn the lessons to avoid making the same mistakes again. That's it.
Yeah. Just 1 second, sorry.